me.
Alright, so there's some consternation on the F1 webosphere as to what exactly it is that these new regulations were supposed to do. Now, I don't necessarily know why that is. I mean, I could be rude and assume people haven't watched enough Formula One or something, but every single time you bring in new regulations, guess what's gonna happen? There's gonna be the people at the front of the grid who found solutions no one else thought of, and they will be far and away the fastest cars on the grid. I mean, usually it's just one car. We're quite fortunate that there's two cars added this season, but usually it's just one car when you switch regulations like this, right? Especially in a quote unquote big way. It's usually just one car that's got all the solutions and everyone else is copying from them. So we're quite fortunate that there's two cars, the Ferrari and the Red Bull, who have both found very useful solutions and they're racing with them. But really, this is what happens every single time the regulations get changed. Alonso, he made a comment on this. I'm not going to bother finding the article, but he made a comment on this saying, "Oh, the FIA should investigate their regulations because the cars aren't supposed to be separated by this much time or what have you." And Alonso, he should be smarter. He should frankly be smarter. Okay? Why am I saying Alonso should be smart? He's been around F1 too long. He's seen regulation changes. He knows what they do. Really, he knows what they do. See, this is the thing that happens every time you get to the end of a regulatory cycle. Then the cars are really close to each other, right? They're really racing with each other, like, separated by a tenth or 2/10 from circuit to circuit. And you might even come up with instances where, well, not the whole grid. I shouldn't say that. Although back in the day, Minardi did manage to just be like a second down on the lead time. And they actually, people don't actually note how fast development happens in Formula One. It might be slower this year with dust budget caps and all of that, but people don't really understand how fast development happens in Formula One. There was a year, I can't tell you exactly which year. Minardi was still racing though. It might have been like '03 or 2002 or something, where they matched the previous pole time from the year before. Right, everyone got faster, but they matched the pole time at a Brazilian Grand Prix from the year before, but they were at the back of the grid. You see? So when you bring in new regulations, you end up with the situation where the top teams, they've got their genius solutions, they've got their genius designers, of course, your Newies and all of these guys. And they come up with solutions that are so far and away ahead of the rest of the pack that, oh, it looks like they're shading the field. Well, they are shading the field. Quite frankly, that's what happens when you bring in new regulations. There's going to be teams that shade the field. Right? Entering this whole V6 hybrid era, yes, Mercedes did put like 3 or 4 years of lead time into that car. But leading into those regulations, 2013, the cars were close. The cars were really close. 2012 was all the cars were close because the regulations had remained stable for a while. You see? Now going into the V6 hybrid era and starting Mercedes' reign of domination, right? What was it that the fans were asking for at that time? Oh, we want closer racing. The cars we need more overtakes and all of that. And those regulations delivered that. I really hated how those cars looked outside of the sex toys on some of them. I really hated how those cars looked with their skinny rear wings, and it was in a really boxy shape and all of that. It was just not good TV. It really wasn't good TV. But those regulations, despite all my all of my views on them, those regulations produced a whole lot of overtaking. Right? No one's going to talk about this too loud. Those regulations produced an incredible amount of overtaking. I would even say too much overtaking, but anyway. So suddenly everyone is getting their wish of, oh, there's more overtaking, but the Mercedes is dominating. Oh, we don't want a team that's dominating. We want any team to be able to win at any race weekend, like it's 2012 or something. And 2012 was such an outlier of a season. Such an outlier. We're not going to see that for a long time, where there's like 3 or 4 teams who can all win a race at any given weekend. We're not going to see that for a long time. But that's what people kind of want. And they don't really understand that you can't really get that in Formula One. That's not the norm. By a long way, that's not the norm. And quite frankly, if you want that from Formula One, then you need a spec series. Just go watch a spec series. Go watch IndyCar or something. Go watch Formula 2. It's a spec series. Because Formula One will never go with full spec series route. You've got Ferrari who will veto that. You've got McLaren who will veto that. You've got, well, I suppose historically Williams would veto it. I don't know what they would do now. But even like Mercedes would veto that. Red Bull would veto that. There's a whole lot of teams who are really proud of their own engineering prowess that they wouldn't opt into a spec series because they don't get to, they don't get to demonstrate their engineering prowess, their car design prowess. They don't get to demonstrate that. But anyway, where were we now? Yeah, it's the first era of the V6 hybrid era. I mean, the first cars of the V6 hybrid era. The first generation of cars. They produced a lot of overtaking. People won't say that too loud. Everyone got exactly what they wanted with, more overtaking. The cars did that. They weren't close. Well, they got close as the years went on, and then they switched to the high downforce spec of this V6 era. Right? They switched to this high downforce spec. And again, when you switch the regulations, what happens? The cars get separated by internal expertise in all these teams. That's what they get separated by. No matter what rules the rule makers want to bring in, or whatever the fans say about, we need the cars closer, we need more competitive racing, whatever you say about that, when you change the regulations, you skirt that for 2-3 years. You skirt that, you put that on the back burner, because you're not going to get that. Because you're absolutely not going to get that. What was happening last season before we entered these regulations? And it's worth noting that high downforce spec of car, well, the current cars are also high downforce spec, but that high downforce spec of car, specifically with over the body airflow, they had gotten close. The cars had all caught up with each other. I say all, like Ferrari still had their engine woes and all of that. But if Ferrari didn't break the rules on their engine, they would have been right there with Red Bull and Mercedes, and we would have had a 3-way title fight. And you can only get that when the regulations are stable. I don't know if new F1 fans get this or not. You can only get that type of racing when the regulations are stable. So when you change the regulations, you spread the field out. That's just the way it is. This is how it always works in Formula 1. You change regulations, the field gets spread by all internal expertise in these teams. And now you have to wait for the teams down the pecking order to actually catch up with the teams at the front. And those teams at the front, they're still going to be developing, so they're going to be moving their cars forward. The only caveat to that is that because they're closer to the maximum performance delta of whatever the regulations are, there's not that much for them to find relative to all these other guys down the grid who are down a second or 2 seconds or what have you. There's not all that much for them to find at the top of the grid. And this is kind of what's relied on as the years go by, that there isn't more performance ceiling for these top running teams to actually hit. This is what we rely on in order to close up the field as the years go by. So Alonso saying his thing of these regulations aren't doing what they said on the tin. They kind of have already done what they said on the tin, because the cars aren't separated by as large a margin as they would normally be after a regulation shift. So they kind of already doing what they said on the tin. If you gave these regulations, I don't know, 6 years, 7 years to cook, with no changes to the engine or what have you, or no significant changes, let me say. Mind you, they're always bringing in like minor regulation changes here and there over the years. But when you switch formula, right, when you have a regulation change that's large enough to actually shift formula instead of just tailoring the formula, right? When you have a regulation shift that shifts the formula, this is what happens. You end up with teams who are far and away better than all the other teams down the grid. And it's up to those teams down the grid to catch up. I mean, those cars have to run in public. It's not like, the race is being run in... It's not like the race is being run in tunnels or something where, like, the cameras can't see or anything and you just see who comes out at the end of the tunnel. That's not it at all. So all the information is out in the public for all these teams to now go and pick apart and apply it to their own car. All of that is out in public now. But this is what happens when you bring in new regulations. You end up with teams being separated by large margins. And you'll be coming in from previous regulations. And I've said this on just random YouTube videos, maybe even Formula One videos, when they were announcing this downforce, I say, when they were announcing the high downforce era, and also when they were announcing this ground effects era. I'll probably say some comments here and there. They weren't popular. They weren't popular comments at the time. Who knows? Maybe they're popular now, but they weren't popular comments at the time, pointing out that, well, the racing is close right now, or pointing out for the first generation of cars for this V6 hybrid era that the racing is close right now. If you pointed that out, oh, you're a persona non grata. You're a persona non grata. People pretended you didn't exist, or maybe like I got shadow banned or something on these channels, who knows. But the first generation of V6 hybrid cars, they delivered on the overtaking that the fans were asking for. They delivered on that. They over-delivered on that, quite frankly. And then what was the complaint going into the V6, not the V6, man, the high downforce era that we've just come from? What was the complaint? Oh, the cars don't look fast. And they didn't look fast. Matter of fact, the cars weren't fast. They were 4 seconds slower. So Bernie being the guy who is perhaps more connected with fan consent than other heads, than other VVIPs in this F1 space. He's perhaps more connected with fan consent, and he said, well, these cars look slow, so we have to just make them look faster. And he made them look faster. That was the number one, that was the primary aim of switching to that super high downforce era. That was the primary aim of that. We got to make these cars look faster. So Bernie, he had that implemented, and look, the cars look faster. It was no longer about, oh, you got to have overtaking, whatever. Bernie said, just make the cars look faster on TV, because most of the audience is on TV. And if you can't entertain that audience, forget about, the 2 billion dollar payout at the end of the year for all the TV rights and everything. Forget about that. You won't get that because people won't watch because it looks boring. The cars look slow. And even with just aiming for making the cars look faster, right? Look what happened when the regulations got to cook for 6 years. We kept those regulations for 2 years longer than they wanted. But look what happened when the regulations were allowed to just cook. Oh, suddenly the grid is closing up. Oh, these gaps are getting smaller between these teams. Now suddenly you've got Bottas qualifying down there in a Mercedes. Wasn't that far down, but you get what I'm saying. Right, suddenly you've got these top teams who might qualify a little lower than they were expecting, just on account of the field has been closed up. And this is something that the F1 webosphere just doesn't get right now. I don't know why. I really don't know why. Are these just new fans or something? I would have to assume that it's just new fans who haven't seen enough regulation changes to just be, jaded by it now. Because I've seen quite a few regulation changes. I'm not tooting my own horn, it just is what it is. I've seen a few regulation changes, and this is always what happens. You got your teams who break away at the front with some secret knowledge that no one else has. And you've got all the teams who just simply have to catch up to that knowledge. Now, if you leave the regulations to cook for a long time, these gaps between the teams close. They close. There isn't all that much for the teams at the top to find. Oh, there's a lot for them to find, but relative to everyone else, there's not all that much to find. So you give the regulations enough years, any regulations, you give them enough years, and you'll get your tighter field. You'll get your tighter field. You'll get your closer racing. You'll get all of that if you simply let the regulations cook. Now, controversially, I'm going to say that these regulations are doing exactly what they said on the tin. Exactly what they said on the tin, because the dividers between the cars that have been posted on Twitter and the like, they're really promising for first year of regulations. Those are really promising dividers. There's only 2 cars that are 2 seconds down on the lead. You see? So if you give them 6 years to cook with these regulations, you'll probably only find the team separated by, optimistically 8/10 across the whole grid, less than a second. If you let these regulations cook for 6+ years, you'll probably get that. And you'll probably get really close racing. You'll probably get side-by-side action through like multiple corners, through like a whole lap, 2 laps. But will that happen? I don't know. There's a whole lot of noise on the Twitter. And Alonso, he threw the cat amongst the pigeons when he dropped his commentary on how the new regs didn't close the field as much as expected or whatever. It's the first year of the regs, Alonso. He should know this. I shouldn't have to explain this to Fernando Alonso, right? He should know this. Every time you change the regs, you're gonna get your outliers who are streaks ahead of everyone, and you're gonna get everyone else who's just behind them, to varying degrees, of course, but they'll just be behind them. So no, I'm not entertaining the whole the regulations were brought in to sabotage Mercedes or what have you. I'm not entertaining all of that. This is just what happens when you bring in new regulations. This is the norm. What's happening right now is completely normal. It's completely normal for new regulations. And even Mercedes, they've got a concept that's not actually working. It's not working as intended right now, and they're still better than the rest of the grid, barring your Red Bull and Ferrari. They're in that no man's land between the top 2 and between the rest of the field. They fall in that no man's land where only they exist in it. But these are really promising first year deltas between the cars. Really promising. You give these regulations time to cook, and all these complaints people posted on the Twitter and stuff, I mean, they might even go delete those, right? it will really be that, it will be that the spectacle of seeing these cars racing close by each other, all lap after lap after lap. The spectacle of it will probably, make people go and delete these type of comments. And just for posterity, please don't be harassing nobody in these cars. I couldn't be asked to edit out these names or something. So please don't be harassing the man them on these comments. They probably don't know how this F1 thing works. They don't know what happens when you bring in your regulations. They're seeing it for the first time, or maybe the second time, and they're not quite understanding why it is the way it is. This is the way it is. This is the way it goes. But anyway, that's the vid. Peace.
Hell breezy. Let me show you how to keep the dice rolling when you're doing that thing over there, homie. Hey, let's go! Cause I'm feeling like I'm running and I'm feeling like I gotta get away. Better know that I don't and I won't ever stop. Cause you know I gotta win every day. Go! See, you really wanna pop me. Go! Just know that you will never flop me. And I know that I gotta be a little cocky. Go! You ain't never gonna stop me. Every time I come, a nigga gotta set it, then I gotta go, and then I gotta get it, then I gotta blow, and then I gotta shut it. Any little thing a nigga think that he be doing, cause it doesn't matter, cause I'm gonna dead it. Then I'm gonna murder everything and anything about it. Boom, about a bing. I gotta do a lot of things to make it clearer to a couple niggas that I always win, and then I gotta get it again and again and again. And I be doing it to death, and now I move a little foul. Nigga better call a rap, and everybody know my style. Niggas know that I'm the best when it comes to doing this, and I be banging on my chest, and I'm banging in the east, and I'm banging in the west, and I kinda give you more, and I will never give you less. You will hear it in the street, and you can read it in the press. Do you really wanna know what's next? Let's go. See the way we on it, and we all up in the race, and you know we gotta go now, try to keep up with the pace, and we struggling and hustling and set it, and I get it, and we always gotta do it, take it to another place, gotta taste it, and I gotta grab it, and I gotta cut off